Hi, now I'm going to show you for Windows users how to set up Bash. Now Bash is a terminal and it's a shell actually, and it's very similar to the command shell, the standard Windows command prompt, or PowerShell, but it's one that's used primarily by Linux users, Unix users, the Mac, and I suggest we all use it and then we're all on the same page. It's very convenient, does a lot of things, it's very easy to use. So I'm going to show you how to set it up and configure it so that VS Code will use that as the default terminal. So first we bring up Visual Studio Code. And if you'll see that if we say terminal, by default, it brings up PowerShell. It takes a little while for it to come up on my incredibly slow virtual machine. But PowerShell is the default. And you're free to use it. You're free to use the regular command shell if you want, but I suggest setting it up for Bash. That's what I'm going to give the lessons in. And there are almost all the commands you can do in Bash you can do in PowerShell or in the regular command prompt. Boy, it's taking a long time. But there, it's coming up. There we go. So the way we do this is when we installed Git, it automatically installed Bash. So the way to configure this so the default comes out as Bash, we merely go into our command palette and search for terminal. It actually is on the top here, but normally you'd have to search and select it. And it will say, select your preferred terminal shell. Command prompt, like I said, if you want that. PowerShell, let's just set it to Bash. And away we go. So if we now bring up a terminal again, notice it brings it up as Bash. And this is very, it's its own little world, and I'll give you a brief demonstration of Bash later on. But this is the prompt that it gave you as a default. The thing is, I'm not really crazy about it. You can leave it if you want. But I'm also suggesting that if you do what I'm saying, you could actually then configure this to be whatever you want. So what we're going to do is go to a repository on GitHub, which is a public repository where we store lots of programs. Our examples will be stored there. But the files that we are going to get are what are called dot files. They're little configuration files that when Bash comes up, it will read, and when you have these files, you'll be able to modify them and customize Bash to do whatever you want it to do. So one of the things is it will set the prompt. And, if you like this prompt, you can keep it. But anyway, I suggest going and getting the dot files from the repo, and I'll show you how to do that. It's very easy. We go to the command palette, and we look for Git. And git clone was on the top here already, but I just did that to show you. So we want to do a clone. What clone does, we'll go to that repository, pull down all the files in that directory, and set it into your computer. So we give the URL of the repository. So in this case, it's https://github.com/codecache. Okay, now that's all the stuff for the class will be in this top level, directory. But the repo we want is called dot files, dot_files, and then you end that with a .git, git. So now it's asking where you want to store it. I'm going to store it in projects. You could store it anywhere you want, but this is what I suggest. Put everything in the projects directory, which will store our other files. And now it's getting it. It was very short. And then it says, would you like to open the clone repository? And let's open them in vscode. You can see what they are. And as you can see, there's two files there, bash profile and bash rc. Dot. They're all started with a dot, if you can see the dot. Notice, interestingly enough, that Visual Studio Code automatically knows it's a shell script and is formatting it accordingly. So what happens when the shell runs is it first reads the bash profile. It's very, very simple. This one, it doesn't really do much. All it does is just read bash rc file if it's there. So the bash rc file, I made it again very simple. It sees if we're running interactively, and if we are, then it creates these aliases. And I've just put two of them. They're sort of my favorites, but you can put whatever you want here. For doing a long directory listing, LL, and for doing history, so you don't have to type the entire word. You'll learn as we go on what all this means. And then it changes a command prompt. PS1 is the initial command prompt. And it changes it to be your username, your host name, except that, just notice one thing, should be host, and your working directory. So you'll be able to see what directory you're in. So let's save it because I did make a change. Now, the thing is, they have to be in your home directory. So let's go to our terminal. And we still have our old prompt because it hasn't read these because they're sitting right here. But it does, our old prompt does tell you where we are. So we're in projects.files. We could do an ls and see them, except it doesn't show them because by default it doesn't show .files. But if you do an ls minus al, it will. So let's do a copy, cp, copy our bash profile to our home directory, which is just defined by a tilde. That means home directory. And let's do a copy of the bash rc file to our home directory. Okay? Now they're there. So now when bash comes up, let's try it again. New terminal. And notice it read them because the prompt is definitely different. This bash is different from our previous bash. It's not as colorful for sure, but it's a little simpler. And we can add colors. We can do things as time goes on. You're free to obviously do anything you want here. Here's how I typically would use it. But your username at the name of the host, and this is a virtual host, so it's a little bit odd, but it probably would be the name that you've named your computer. And then a colon, and then your current directory that you're in. The tilde meaning it's your home directory. Okay? Which is, in this case, C users dgel. Now, the C, this is all done in bash land. It's sort of translating all of the Windows directories to Linux-like directories. So that might be, to a Windows user, this might look very odd, but that's what it's doing. And here's just a little bit about bash. It's a little bit cryptic. Unix, this developed in the early 70s. They're still using the basic language, but it was all made to be very easy to type, very short commands. So they're cryptic, no question about it. You just have to learn them or you won't know what they mean. But like to look at a directory listing, it's ls. And the reason, again, like I said, why this one is blank is because ls does not show .files by default. But if you do ll, that was the alias that I set up. ls minus al is really what you would type. It will show them in a long format. Here it's showing your permissions for each file and whether it's a directory or not. For instance, .git has a little d here, which means it's directory. So ls or ll in another alias. If you type alias, I think it'll show you all your aliases. Yeah, these are the ones that we set in our bash file, if you recall, up here. So history, anyway, LL is probably one of the most common ones. LS is the most common command. If you do history, which we've aliased to H, it'll show you all the commands that you've typed. And you can repeat a command. You can use your arrow keys to go through them, the up and down arrow. But you can also just use the exclamation point. And if you say two of them, it just repeats the last command, which was history. Or you can say bang, they call it a bang, and like say 128, give the number of the command, it'll execute it again. There's a lot of things. Believe me, there's a lot of stuff it can do. But, you know, you can substitute things and a lot of things to eliminate typing and keep, you know, so you can really do things quickly. And so ls, pwd will tell you where you're at, your current working directory, print working directory. Doesn't mean password, but we already knew it was in projects.files because our prompt tells you. But anyway, it just confirms that. Here's our working directory. And to cd, to change directory, you say cd to the name of the directory. Like we can go to the tilde, which is home. We can go to home and see what's there. And here's our home directory, which is filled with things. So there's copy, which is cp, you know, source, destination. You give the name of the file, the destination of the file. There's all sorts of shortcuts. So copy's used a lot. We did that to copy our bash files over, our startup files. Oh, I'm sure I'm missing some. Oh, make directory. To make a directory, you say mkdir. That will create a whole directory. We will say create a temp directory. So we just made a temp directory. We can cd to the temp directory. We can look at it. There's nothing here. Whoops. We can use the touch command, which creates a file. There it is. We can remove a file, rm. That's a good summary for right now. Well, you know, there's books on this. There's courses on this. There are websites. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how to use bash, but I think this is sort of the basics. And as we go on, I'll show you more. Most of these commands, sort of like Python in the sense, this is running as a command line interpreter. Like Python, you can take all these commands and put them in a file, and then they're called scripts. So you can have it do all sorts of things on your computer. Listen, the same thing can be done in PowerShell. The same things, actually, many of the things can be done in the Windows command. So I'm not saying it's only bash can do this, but that's sort of the language of the Unix people and the servers and the world that's really being run. So we'll all be using bash. We'll all sort of be on the same page. So in summary, what we did was we enabled bash as the default shell in Visual Studio Code. And then we went into Git, did a clone of a repository on Code Cache's account, the repository being .files. We cloned that. We had to make a little change, it turns out. We then copied them to the home directory, and now we can run bash with these files configuring bash before it runs. And then I showed a little bit of real basic introduction to bash. Thanks.